Hello, my name is Safa and I'll walk you through my thesis journey. So I started last September with researching my two favorite things, literature and architecture. I was fascinated by how language and words shape the way we think of architecture and how stories evoke a vivid architectural experience in our mind. I started looking at some of the historical narratives associated with classical architecture and I thoroughly analyzed these buildings. So, talking about some of them, the Acropolis and how it was converted into a church and a temple and even a mosque according to the political situation at that time, yet it remained a pilgrimage site. The Temple of Heaven, its use of geometry, how the circle symbolizes heaven and the square symbolizes earth. Then we have the pyramids that were built by the pharaohs, the earliest sacred structures. They were built as royal tombs and have a very simple triangular form. Al-Kaaba is the most holy site for Muslims and it has a simple cubic form. Then Bermonti's architecture, he used very sacred geometries and the golden ratio of the Vitruvian Man, and he has an experiential effect of spirituality in his architecture. Taj Mahal had a very strong axial design, and again, it was built by the Shah as a memorial of his wife. All of these case studies shared the aspect of sacredness and trying to reach the divine. So, as to my thesis, I decided to take the most sacred text of in Kuwait, which is the Quran, and see how the Quranic verses visualize sacred spaces, and compare that to what I analyzed earlier. I made visions of some of these verses. So the verses talked about how the sacred spaces are elevated, and they talk about parallel paradises and long-standing shadows, light coming from above, water as the base of life, and earth as a settlement, the sky as a higher roof, and anchors on earth. So the verses had a very different meaning from those sacred case studies that were very highly symbolic and driven by sociopolitical agendas throughout history, seeking power and monumentality, deviating from original texts and meanings of sacredness and spirituality. This inspired me to create an architecture that is supposed to be sacred and has a huge power and sociopolitical connection to society, yet not monumental or evocative of fear. So a court complex that speaks of the true meanings of justice, balance, power, and ethical society, translated from their meanings in the most respected text in Kuwait. The verses talked about how balance can be imposed on us humans or on architecture as I was interrupting it. The earth as a settlement, the sky as a ceiling, no form in between can escape the two. They talked about honesty and exposure. The crimes cannot be hidden from God, and the wrongs in society shouldn't be buried and concealed, but revealed and judged for people to learn and be more moral and ethical. Especially since in Kuwait, it's totally the opposite. So the existing courthouses in Kuwait, we have 6 complexes in the 6 main areas أو محافظات. الأحمدي, فروانية, Kuwait City, جهران, حولي. The old ones looked like poorly designed residential buildings and speak nothing of the functionality of the space or what it's supposed to do. The new ones designed by Pace have a very monumental, bulky cubic form with central atriums, covered with arabesque patterns. Then the symbol of justice is stuck on its facade, and it becomes a decorated shed. The old Palace of Justice might be an exception as it's less fake and more related to its context, and that might be a strong reason for why it became a landmark of justice in Kuwait, and as used as the catching image of any law or case-related news. Unfortunately, it's threatened to be demolished now as a new Palace of Justice is being built. And again, it has a very out of context form with more than 22 floors in the form that doesn't relate to the true meanings of justice and ethics in society. Thus, my project, Verses into Spaces, is exploring the meanings of ethical verses in Quran, spatially translating them into an architectural language which represent the judicial court system in Kuwait through a more ethical, honest, and humble lens. The perfect site to me was in the heart of the city, along the Arabian Gulf Street, overlooking the sea, and surrounded by a powerful monumental structure that are supposed to speak of justice and laws. That site is in front of the parliament. The parliament is the place where laws are made, while the court, my court, is where laws are implemented and righteousness is given back to the oppressed. Yet the parliament and all its surrounding structures are not accessible by the public whatsoever. While walking on the site, the military soldiers and guards looked at me as if just by walking it was a crime. So I took these photos secretly since it's illegal there, don't tell anyone, wanting to picture how much unwelcoming it felt. Another interesting thing about the site is that it's very rich with geometry and symbolism, but it's very whitewashed. It's also a walkable area along the seashore, and that is something I wanted to keep and encourage, not to close the courthouse, but to open it to everyone to come and be part of the legal process. Of course, taking into consideration 3 levels of invisible security. So I started experimenting with very simple forms, taking the arch as a humble, honest structure or unit, and formally exploring its potential through repetition, junction, extrusion, recession, and modulation, trying to create a more humane architectural experience that is spatially rich. With more honest materiality and a serene, quiet space rather than something big and monumental. So these were initial experimentations of court spatial configurations, shaded pathways, and interior spaces. So with my design methodology, I didn't want to disturb that sweep in the site, so I started with having a grid that follows the site's shape. 3 things were important to me site-wise as I started designing. First thing is that we have 2 opposite accesses for the site. The first is public and open for visitors. It's in front of the Americani Cultural Center. And the second is more private, beside the parliament, looking into the parliament. And it's for judges, criminals with the police, the office workers, lawyers, prosecutors, and office clerks. The second important thing was the views, as I wanted an uninterrupted visual connection to the sea, and another to the parliament and the main street, the American Cultural Center. And of course, the public zone is have these 3 axes, and then the semi-public is in between, and the semi-private where the courts are. So from this side, which is the more open or public, we have the library, the offices, and the first instance and appeal courts. More open, more public. Then in the other side, more private, it has the College of Law with its mosque, the offices, and the family courts, which are private. And in between them are the retail and main lobby, and then main courts administration and the Supreme Court, the highest and most dominant. Important. And then the entrances pop out of the structure. That's the final massing of it. The walkways along the sea were also very important, and between the different programs of the project to stitch it together. So the first sweep includes the public buildings. I have the library, the main lobby and retail and dance administration, and then the school. The big vaults indicates the entrances of these public spaces. They're very visible from far away and highly welcoming. Then as you go in, The spaces become in a more humane scale and humble, not to overwhelm or evoke any fear of the space, but to create a sensation of safety and closure. So this is from the main middle building. This is from the library. And that is the moment from the pathway between library offices and courts. And the sea is visible at the end of it where the courts are located. So we talked about the first sweep, public, and then as you go in, this is the semi-private office buildings, higher than the public buildings, but still way lower than the courts, which are located at the end of the climax of the site. So the court stands higher than anything else. They're transparent in some of the courtrooms for public cases here. And more secure in private family courts. So there's a visible journey of procession in the site, coming from the street where the entirely public zone is, then to the more private family court zone along the sea. So the courts are more private in terms of accessibility, but they are exposed for people walking by along the seashore to see what's happening inside and be part of the legal process, as the verses say that wrongness in society shouldn't be buried and concealed, but revealed and judged, for people to learn and be more ethical. So if I was walking here, I can either just watch the case happening or just come inside the complex, enter, have a 3 zones of security, and then be part of that legal process. And the hierarchy of the courts reflect their status. The central high structure is the Supreme Court. Then the jurisdiction of constitutionality comes lower. Then the appeal and the first instance court, and finally the smaller family courts at the side. Inside the courtroom, the norms of court layout is challenged, as the judge is no longer the highest entity in the courtroom, but rather stands in a slightly higher platform in the middle of the triangular height, triple height vaulted space, feeling the humility of the judge and the power of the public behind him and their engagement in the process. In the cases, as viewers stand in a second level above the judge as witnesses of this divine legal process. The differences between the inside and the outside of the complex are blurred, as those vaulted shading structures stitch the buildings together and until they continue to form the urban pathways to the sea and the parking. Also, in some areas, the arches create openings and atriums. In other areas, the arches pop out of the general form of the as extrusions of internet spaces, and in other areas, the arches are recessed to allow for outdoor public seating squares. This is a moment from the entrance of the library. It shows that humane scale and that sensation that the verses talked about. The general form is ascending towards the courts, trying to symbolize that connection between humans on earth and the divine in the sky, relating more to the natural settings of the site and the context. So it goes at the same level, it goes lower than the parliament. I'm not challenging you. And then it goes slightly higher because this is where laws are literally made. Implemented. And that's it. Thank you for listening.